The storm outside had gathered with an unusual ferocity, lashing against the tinted windows of the private jet as it cut through the night sky. For Alexander Holt, billionaire tech mogul, it was nothing compared to the storm that raged in his heart. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating when closing billion-dollar deals, seemed distant, even haunted. Tonight, for the first time in 15 years, he was flying back home unannounced. No press, no chauffeurs, no assistants. Just him and a gnawing ache he hadn't dared acknowledge for years. Home, the word felt foreign. It had been his fortress once, a small but warm house nestled on the outskirts of town. Now, after decades of estrangement, Alexander wasn't even sure if his father still thought of it as home, or if his father even thought of him at all. He hadn't planned this trip. That morning, while sitting in his glass-walled office on the 47th floor overlooking the city, Alexander received a phone call from an old neighbor. She told him in hushed tones that his father was frail, that he rarely left the house, and that he often sat alone, staring into the distance as though waiting for someone who never came. The words lodged themselves deep in Alexander's chest, reopening wounds he thought he had buried under wealth, power, and relentless ambition. The jet landed and Alexander slipped into a rented car. He didn't want his entourage. He didn't want attention. Tonight was about something else, something raw, personal, and terrifying. The road stretched before him, lined with trees that whispered secrets of his childhood, each mile taking him closer to the man he hadn't hugged in more than a decade. By the time he arrived, the house looked smaller than he remembered. The paint had faded, the garden was overgrown, and the front porch light flickered weakly in the night. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door, the same door his father used to paint bright blue every summer. It wasn't locked. He stepped inside and his heart pounded as familiar scents rushed back to him. Old wood, faint lavender, and something cooking in the kitchen. The house wasn't silent. There were voices. A woman's gentle tone, warm and soothing, drifted through the hallway, followed by a low chuckle that froze Alexander in his tracks. His father's laugh. He hadn't heard it in years, not since the bitter argument that had driven them apart, the day Alexander stormed out, vowing never to come back until he made something of himself. And he had. He had built an empire, risen to the top of the world. But in that moment, standing in the shadows of the hallway, none of that mattered. Slowly, Alexander moved toward the living room. What he saw made him stop cold. There in the glow of a single lamp, his frail father sat in an armchair, a wool blanket draped over his knees. Beside him, kneeling on the floor with a basin of warm water, was a young woman, clearly the maid. She was gently washing his father's feet, drying them with utmost care, her movements tender and reverent, as though she were tending to someone she deeply cherished. His father smiled down at her, not with superiority or entitlement, but with a warmth Alexander had almost forgotten. The sight pierced through him. Here was the man who once stood so tall, now fragile and aged, cared for by a woman who was not family yet acted as though she were. Alexander felt an unfamiliar lump in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stood there, frozen, watching a kind of love and humility he had never seen in all his boardrooms, offices, or mansions. The maid noticed him first. Her eyes widened and she quickly set the basin aside, bowing her head slightly as though embarrassed. His father turned his head slowly, squinting in disbelief. Then his eyes widened and for a fleeting moment the years melted away. Alex, his father's voice was raspy, but it carried the same strength that once scolded him for skipping chores, the same tone that taught him the value of hard work. "Dad," Alexander finally whispered, his voice cracking. Silence hung heavy. His father's expression shifted, shock, then hesitation, then a glimmer of something that looked like forgiveness. The maid stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'll give you both some time," she said softly before slipping out of the room, leaving father and son alone for the first time in over a decade. Alexander stepped forward, taking in the sight of his father's thin frame, the wrinkles carved deep into his face, the tremor in his hands. Guilt crushed him. He had all the money in the world, but he hadn't been here. He hadn't seen the slow decline, the lonely years, the empty chair at family holidays. "You came," his father finally said, breaking the silence. "I should have come sooner," Alexander admitted, lowering himself into the chair across from him. "I let pride and anger keep me away, and I'm sorry." His father's eyes glistened, though his voice remained steady. "I was angry too. I wanted you to succeed, but I didn't want to lose my son in the process, and I did." The words hit Alexander harder than any business loss ever could. He reached for his father's hand, rough and trembling, and for the first time in years, their fingers intertwined. "I've built everything I thought I wanted," Alexander said, his voice raw. "But none of it matters if I don't have you. Seeing her, the maid, the way she cared for you, it made me realize how much I failed in the simplest thing, being here for you." His father squeezed his hand weakly. "You're here now, that's what matters." Tears burned in Alexander's eyes. He let them fall. For once, he didn't care about appearances, about reputation, about being the untouchable billionaire. He was just a son, broken and longing for reconciliation. Over the next few hours, they talked. They talked about old memories, fishing trips, burnt pancakes, and long drives in the rusted pickup truck. They talked about the years in between, the mistakes, the regrets, the missed birthdays. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was healing. Later, the maid returned with tea and quietly placed it on the table. Alexander looked at her with gratitude. "You've been looking after my father when I wasn't here," he said sincerely. "I can never thank you enough." She shook her head gently. "He's not just my employer, he's family. He made me feel at home when I had none. Caring for him is the least I can do." Her words humbled Alexander. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted him for his money, his influence, his name. Yet here was someone who gave without expecting anything in return. In that moment, Alexander made a vow. He wouldn't let the past dictate the future. He would be present, not just with his wealth, but with his time, his love, and his presence. As dawn broke and light streamed through the curtains, Alexander sat beside his father, who had dozed off peacefully. The billionaire looked around the small, worn living room, the peeling wallpaper, the simple furniture, and for the first time in years, he felt rich in the truest sense of the word. Because wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or stock markets. It was measured in moments like this, in forgiveness, in love, in the quiet presence of family. And as he watched his father sleep, Alexander whispered a promise to himself. Never again would pride steal these moments from him. Never again would he let the distance grow. He was home. And this time, he wasn't leaving.